Namaskar. Good evening. So, if recent newspaper reports are to be believed, this special elite force will be a part of the Gaganyaan mission by ISRO. You must have also heard of this elite force being used in the recent G20 meet that was held in Kashmir. Again, if newspaper reports are to be believed, the American president wanted this specific force to guard him while on his visit to India. Again, so much of it is legend, so much of it is actual information that you can verify. However, having said that, what we are looking at today is discussing one of the most elite forces in the Indian security doctrine. Today we will take a look at Marcos, the Marine Commandos. Now, if you were to look at the history of covert ops in India, you find reference to covert ops, covert personnel, usage of personnel for sabotage as early as the Chandragupta Maurya ascension, the war between Vaishali and Magad, as Mudra Rakshasa, that was written by a very prominent play. In fact, mentions this, Vishakha Datta being the author of that play. He mentions the usage of covert personnel for covert ops. So we do have a history of warfare that involves covert operations. However, in this presentation, we will take a look at not just the history of special forces, we will also take a look at the origin of special forces. We will understand the different kind of special forces that exist in India. And finally, we will take a look at what it takes to become a part of the Marcos team. What it takes to be a Marine Commando. What are the expectations? What's the training like? And indeed, we will end with what's the future for this particular agency. Hello and welcome to Study IQ IAS. I am Bhuvan Apurvajha. As to kick off this conversation first, we will look to understand the history of special forces now. Now, like I told you, in the Indian context, Mudra Rakshasa, the play written by Vishakha Datta, this mentions the usage of covert operations by personnel. However, if you go around the same time in the world architecture, you take a look at the Chinese strategist Jiang Zia, who mentions recruiting motivated men for specialized units to carry out what he calls are the impossible tasks. Now, what are the impossible tasks? If you research into it a bit, you understand that he's talking about covering rapid distances in a short amount of time. He's asking these men to scale unscalable heights, essentially do the impossible. Thereafter, you must have heard of the ninjas. Again, popular culture has obviously reference to them aplenty, but then there exists evidence of Japanese ninjas who would function alongside the conventional force in their attack. If you were to understand it in one sentence, well, they acted as the tip of the spear. So, finally, when you come to the modern world, the modern history, you realize that this was first thought of, first mooted up by the British government. The British Indian Army, in fact, specialized in two units. They formed two particular units, the Corps of Guides and the famed Gorkha Scouts. Now, these two units were used first in the Battle of Tirah, the Tirah campaign that was held in the year 1897 in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa region of current day. On the opposite side, where the Afridis, the Ozakrais, the tribals of that area, as the British Indian Army looked to gain a major foothold in what is one of the most critical areas of transition. So eventually, when you come to modern day, you realize that the Corps of Guides is now metamorphosed into the Frontier Force Regiment of the Pakistan Army. Whereas the Gorkha Scouts, the famed Gorkha Scouts, is now known as 5 Gorkha Rifles, 5GR, a legendary part of the Indian Army. So this was the first instance of specialized units being raised for special purposes. Thereafter, you have evidence of German stormtroopers and the Italian Arditi, who would cause maximum damage. Why? Well, they specialized in essentially penetrating deep behind the enemy lines and then carrying out activities of sabotage, of carrying out all sorts of activities that would essentially hamper the progress of the opposition. They would weaken the opposition from within, carry out targeted assassinations. All of that would be included, essentially to break the morale of the opposing force. Finally, you realize that modern special forces as we understand it today, so every country has their own special force now, but then the first instance of this organized elite unit being raised was by the British forces. Just after World War II, they came up with SAS, the Specialized Air Services, in the year 1941. Thereafter, all the countries across the world followed this model. Now, like I told you, every country has its own specialized units that specialize again in a particular kind of activity. So we will understand that as we go forward in this presentation. Now, what exactly are special forces? What's their capability? What are they expected to do? How are they different from conventional forces? Well, number one, what they specialize in is reconnaissance and surveillance, especially not during peacetime, but in hostile environments, behind enemy line probably. So what essentially is the difference, you might ask, between reconnaissance and surveillance? Well, reconnaissance is short-term surveillance for specific intel gathering. It's for a limited amount of time, and the outcome that you want has to be gained in that limited amount of time. Whereas surveillance is more prolonged. It's more expansive in nature. It's routine. It is derived to gain all sorts of information and intel that you can possibly lay your hands on. Thereafter, these units specialize in offensive action. Like I told you, the tip of the spear. The conventional forces specialize in laying a siege. They are the blunt object that will hammer its way to victory. However, the conditions for that victory are often created by the activities of the special forces. Like I told you again, CICT operations, the counter-insurgency and counter-terrorism operations, especially in the Indian context, become of utmost relevance for us to understand. Now, you must be aware that Jammu and Kashmir has seen extensive insurgency and terrorism coming across from our western borders. In Northeast, there have been a lot of unrest, which is why you have units of the army, and now that includes special forces, which basically have expertise in CICT operations. And again, these two are separate operations. CT, counter-terrorism, is to ensure that you neutralize the terrorists, that you neutralize whoever is the belligerent on the other side. Whereas insurgency is to make sure that the overground workers, the environment that leads to them being successful in that hostile environment, well, that is also taken care of. Again, public support is a major part of all of these. You need the support of the local population. You have to win them over. All of these essentially are done in tandem with the special forces and the conventional forces. Thereafter, like I told you, these units will specialize in sabotage, in demolition, in making sure that the enemy's supply chains are adversely affected, that they cannot replenish their stocks, that their arms and ammunition are compromised, that the position of authority on the other side, probably a commander, a military strategist, well, he's assassinated. Things that will weaken the opposition's morale. Thereafter, they also function to train friendly foreign countries and their special forces too, as part of military-to-military engagement. Having understood now the history of special forces and the capability, the expectations of special forces, now let's try and go ahead and take a look at an example, a small example of how special forces can eventually affect the outcome at such a degree that cannot be imagined. And I want to take you to closer home, to Bangladesh in the year 1971. Now this was the picture. The Pakistani army was terrorizing the citizens of the people of East Pakistan. Rapes were aplenty, abuse was aplenty, an army with no morale let loose on an innocent civilian population. That was the order of the day in East Pakistan. Thereafter, in the midst of this, you had the World Bank. A team of World Bank was to visit then East Pakistan, now Bangladesh. Now, what the people from Bangladesh feared was that if a situation of normalcy was portrayed by the Pakistanis, then eventually they will have access to some much needed funds that the World Bank was considering to lend to Pakistan. It's not a recent phenomenon, the country asking for money. That has existed from time immemorial. One another example. So this was the issue at hand. Mukti Bahini, we have all heard of this legendary force of the country of Bangladesh. So Mukti Bahini, to make sure that this perception of normalcy was compromised, eventually set up the Melaghar camp, just very near to Agartala, near in the Indian territory. This camp was set up, and a lot of training was imparted to special individuals. Small teams were created with specific purposes. And just before the World Bank team was to land in Dhaka, these people carried out their sabotage activities. They terrorized the Pakistani army as well as their sympathizers in East Pakistan. They targeted critical infrastructure, power stations. All of this eventually got the support of the East Pakistan population also, the present-day Bangladesh population. And eventually, when the World Bank team came, they saw that, well, the situation was not normal, violence was amok, there was utter complete chaos in Dhaka, and which is why that particular funding, that particular aid did not come. Now, this is a very small but a very pertinent example to see how a group of individuals can affect something as large as the outcome of a war. Which is why India also has given a lot of thrust in that direction. Now, when we go forward, we try and take a look at the Special Forces of India. What are the different constituents of Special Forces in India? Well, we have a military constituent and a non-military constituent. So, in the military Special Force, you have the tri-services, the Army, the Navy and the Air Force. All three have their own special units. Para-SF came in the year 1966, was raised in the year 1966. The Marcos, the topic of our discussion for today, came in the year 1987. Garud, from the Indian Air Force. The Navy was Marcos, the Air Force Garud, came in the year 2004. And at present, you have an entity called the Armed Forces Special Op Division, which includes serving personnel from all three realms, from all three departments. So this is the military component. At the same time, there exists non-military component. So you must have heard of the National Security Guards. Well, they come under the Home Ministry. At the same time, you have the Research and Analysis Wing, which comes under the Cabinet Secretariat, reports directly to the Prime Minister's office. Special units have also been raised by police forces across India. Paramilitary has their own special forces. Ghatak team is what it is known as. So what was the need to raise all of this? What was the need to do this? Well, again, as part of the Indian security doctrine, you have to understand that these forces have specific usages. Specific usages with specific personnel, with specific training. Which is why that conversation around which one is better, is that the better or is this the better? Well, that conversation is moot. It's like comparing apples to oranges. If a particular unit specializes in sabotage operations, well, the other one might specialize in hostage rescue. If another one specializes in, say, offensive capability, another one might be in intelligence gathering. How are you going to find out which one is better? Which is why the whole importance of these particular organizations, entities becomes of important for us to understand. Now going forward and try and understand now the history of Marcos in India. So you had the first diving school that was set up in Kochi in the year 1955. Obviously, I beg your pardon, this was with the help of the Special Boat Service. Okay. This was with the help of the Special Boat Service, which was a part, again, of the United Kingdom's security architecture. And these people helped set up a diving school in Kochi. In fact, you would be surprised to know that this naval elite unit functioned in the year 1971 against the Pakistan Army. However, due to inadequate training and equipments that time, they were not able to make that much of a dent in the enemy's armor that time. However, fast forward to 1987, and well, this has all now got a structure to it. There's a structure, there's a mandate, there's operations, there's training, and there are funds. So, this comes into existence, the MARCOS comes into existence in 1987 at INS Abhimanyu, which is currently, in fact has always been in Mumbai. Finally, their permanent base is now set up, which is at INS Karna in Vishakhapatnam. At present, they are located in Mumbai, Vishakhapatnam, Goa, Kochi and Port Blair across the length and breadth of the country. They are also stationed in Vular Lake and Pangong Tso, which is why I was quite amused to see a lot of people express their surprise that the MARCOS were there at Vular Lake. They were there in Srinagar during the G20 conference. Well, they have always been there. In fact, Operation Rakshak, which they are a part of, has been an ongoing operation, and they are expected to guard the borders of the Vular Lake and the Jhelum River. They have been there for quite some time, obviously. Those reactions were not based on facts, but then that's the truth. Now going forward, so we will take a look at some of the most important operations now that MARCOS has been a part of. The Marine Commandos, the famed Marine Commandos of Indian Navy. Well, the first one that comes to mind is Operation Pawan. In Sri Lanka, as part of the IPKF, the Indian Peacekeeping Force, well, they were tasked with the capture of the Jaffna and the Trincomalee ports. Now, reports say that the situation came to such that the MARCOS individuals, the Marine Commandos, they swam close to 12 kilometers. 12 kilometers, they swam to the target, demolished it, received enemy fire, swam back to safety. Obviously, there were some casualties, but for this whole daring operation, imagine blowing up ports. The Guru Nagar port, was eventually demolished by the actions of the Marine Commandos, and for which you had Lieutenant Aravind Singh, who was awarded the Mahavir Chakra. He later retired as a Commodore in the Indian Navy. So this was the first instance, the Operation Pawan, where they demolished the whole port, leading to a major advantage for the Indian party there. Thereafter, you have evidence of them in Operation Cactus in the year 1988, just 1 year after their formation. Now, President Gayoom of Maldives was a threat. There was a coup attempted from the Sri Lankan side, from Sri Lankan militants, and India came to the rescue of Maldives. So that time you had MARCOS that was deployed, and eventually these militants tried to flee from MARCOS, from Maldives, on this particular merchant vessel Progress Light. INS Godavari, another ship of the Indian Navy, swung into action. So did MARCOS. Eventually these individuals are apprehended, and with the help of the Sri Lankan force, all of these were caught and an unconditional surrender was taken in Sri Lanka. Again, a shining example of how MARCOS was important as the tip of the spear. Thereafter, you have examples of them functioning alongside the conventional army in Kargil War, during the Kargil War. During Operation Rahat in Yemen, when the Saudi coalition was bombing Yemen, well, MARCOS was there for evacuating all the people who were there. At the same time, extensive use in anti-piracy operations. Like I told you, India-Pacific, Indian Ocean, in fact, is an area of immense strategic importance. Every country wanting to flex its naval muscles, and the MARCOS does it on our behalf. Across the Gulf of Aden and the strategic area just left of Sri Lanka, well, that whole area is patrolled by MARCOS teams. At the same time, Black Tornado, the 26/11 siege by the terrorists from across the border, saw MARCOS being deployed too. And finally, like I told you, Operation Rakshak, the CICT operations in Jammu and Kashmir, well, MARCOS have been a part of them for a long time. So considering that they have an illustrious history, that they have been a tangible asset for India, not just in terms of enemy action, but also engagement with friendly foreign countries. It's important for us to understand as we go ahead that what does it take to become one. So eventually, the first criteria is that, well, you have to be a serving personnel, either a sailor or an officer of the Indian Navy. Most recently, the reports have indicated that now female officers and sailors will also be inducted into the Marcos. Shining example again of our Nari Shakti. Right? And so once you have to understand that, well, the training is arduous to say the least. And I'm being very polite to say that it's just arduous. It's difficult. It's designed to break your spirit, your body, your morale. But eventually those who come out of it are the ones who are the best of the lot. The creme de la creme, as it's often said. So you have the induction assessment, a three-day program, which is essentially the making or breaking of individuals. 80% of the people flunk out at this very stage. You have morning runs, evening runs, intense physical assessments, mental assessments, all of which lead to the sieving of 80% of the candidates. And bear in mind, these are not civilians like you and I. These are actually serving personnel of the Indian Navy. So obviously their fitness is at a higher level than us. And yet, 80% of them drop out in the induction assessment. Thereafter, you have the Hell's Week. A 7-day course which is again designed to break your mind, your body, your spirit, to push you right till the edge, the precipice of your limits, which essentially culminates with an action where you have to carry a 25 kg load, crawl through for 1.6 kilometers, then with that load, go for another 2 kilometers of hurdles. And obviously you have been sleep deprived because it's the Hell's Week. You haven't slept for more than possibly 4 hours in a week. 4 hours in a week, yes, I am correct. And finally, after you reach the end of the course, you have to take a shot from a distance of 25 meters from a pistol at a target with your friend just standing alongside it. Intense, physical, arduous nature, well, you can understand it right away. It's not just the body, it's also control over the mind that is expected of a Marcos. If you were to survive the Hell's Week, well, then you get sent to the basic and the advanced training. Again, individuals that belong in special forces aren't mass-produced. These are special individuals that require chiseling, which is why the training of 2 to 3 years, in fact, is justified when it comes to special forces. So all of these individuals now are free fall qualified. Now, what is free fall qualified? Well, it's military parachuting essentially. Okay. And what does HALO and HAHO mean? High altitude, and you exit at a low altitude. Whereas this is that you open your parachute at a higher altitude. This is often used for dropping supplies, weapons, arms, ammunitions, whereas this is often used for inserting individuals. And just to give you a sense of what is required during this whole process, well, you are going to hit terminal velocity of roughly 203 kilometers per hour during this whole high altitude operations. This free falling of parachuting, well, that's the terminal velocity you are looking at. And the whole time frame from the time you exit your Ilyushin 76 to the time you hit the ground, it's less than 2 minutes, which is why enemy's reaction is often compromised. 2 minutes is far too less for an effective response to even be planned, forget executed. So with this kind of training, with this intense training, physical training, mental training, language proficiency, intelligence gathering, usage of arms and ammunitions, they are adept in using everything from clubs and maces to the most sophisticated of weapons. Different forms of martial arts, all of that is fed and taught to them. You think you are a multilingual, polyglot? Well, you should speak to one Marcos. They'll know more than 3, 4, 5 languages and good proficiency. So with this kind of individual, you can understand the kind of effort it takes, the kind of discipline it takes to become a part of the specialized force. Now going forward, and you understand this now. So once you have in fact gone through the training and once you are part of the advanced training now, well, you are going to be integrated. There is an integration happening. What is the part of the integration? You are going to be training with your friends, your compatriots from the other arms of the Indian Armed Forces. So these individuals now get sent to different training schools across India. They simulate exercises in different conditions. And not just these, well, they also have access to urban warfare mechanisms now. All of this is done so as to minimize the response time in case of a problem, so that another 2611 is averted, is taken care of. So you have the Commando training camp in Belgaum, the Special Forces Training School in Nahan, which is in Himachal Pradesh, the Counter-Insurgency and Jungle Warfare School in Mizoram, Vairangte, the High Altitude Warfare School in Sonmarg and the Parvat Ghatak in Tawang, the Desert Warfare School in Rajasthan. Again, you could make a mental note of these, but then these are the institutions of excellence that these individuals are sent to hone their skills, to become, as I say, the tip of the spear. Now, with this having been done, what are the advantages? Well, most of the security, most of the operations nowadays require you to integrate seamlessly with the other armed forces. After all, you are going to be inserted in a particular situation, in a hostile situation. Which is why these places act as places of integration. You learn about the ways and means in which other institutions are working. After all, not everything is on theory like for you and I, but actual practical applications. Human lives are at stake here, which is why it is best prepared. Going forward now, and before I wrap up this small presentation, here are certain things that should be kept in mind when talking about Marcos or in general special forces. Number one, humans are more important than hardware. And this has been corroborated by several military experts, historians, analysts who will tell you that it's the size of the dog, the size of the fight in the dog. How much is he willing to go past his mandate? You might equip someone with the best of weaponry. However, if he lacks the particular motivation, well, it's not going to come to anything at all. It's going to come to naught. So which is why this is often said that humans are more important than weaponry. However, that's no excuse to not arm your individuals, to not arm your special forces. However, it's also incumbent upon the government to make sure that the best of tech, that the best of weapons, arms, ammunitions is made available to these special forces. At the same time, quality is better than quantity, and SF cannot be mass-produced. Now, more often than not, this thought must have come to your mind, that if they are indeed so good, well, why not have the whole Indian Navy as part of Marcos? Or why not have the whole Indian Army trained to become a para-SF? Like I told you, every department, every tangent of the special forces have different usages. Laying siege, fighting a prolonged warfare requires a different kind of training and strategy. Whereas these activities are essentially short-term, which is why the training is specialized completely different. You cannot mass produce an individual with training of up to 2 to 3 years. Imagine the amount of investment the state is having to make. Imagine the amount of training the particular person goes through. Imagine the number of people who drop out. 80% drop out of these training programs. Which is why these two hold relevance. That it is always better to have quality rather than quantity. 20 special forces will do the work for you. Well-trained special forces will do the work for you, what 500 cannot. At the same time, SF cannot be created after emergencies occur. You need to preempt problems and think of ways in which you can solve them. This has been a major lacuna insofar as the Indian security doctrine has come. We have often learnt it the hard way. Again, another change that one could foresee happening is that with climate change happening, probably NDRF could also be included as a part of the special force, depending on the kind of role it will be required to play in the coming days, the coming years, the coming decades. Which is why this statement holds true, that special forces cannot be created after the emergencies have occurred. That would be a faulty strategy. And finally, almost all SF ops require non-special forces support. Like I told you, the tip of the spear, no matter how sharp, will require the rest of the spear for support. Which is why you need better integration of services, of in fact training and amalgamation between these two entities at a larger scale. That efficiency of integration has to be involved. Right. With that, we come to the end of this special presentation that I had for you on Marcos, the special elite force of the Indian Navy. If you did like this presentation, well, do consider perusing my other videos. I do a lot of these videos, lot of content, which on areas that interest me, on areas that I think would interest you. However, if there's a particular topic that you would like me to cover for you, please do mention it in the comment box below. Till I see you again the next time with another such topic at 9 p.m. IST. This is Bhuvan Apurva Jha signing off for Study IQ IAS English. Thank you for watching.